From legendary designers to influential personalities, the sneaker industry is shaped by a diverse cast of characters. Ever wondered who's behind the scenes driving the trends and innovation in sneaker culture? Well, today we're going to look into the stories of 15 influential figures who've left their own unique mark on the sneaker world. This time on Fire Footwear. Welcome back to Fire Footwear, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Frates, and I want to, as always, thank you for tuning into this podcast. It means a lot to me that you spend your time listening to this podcast in some form or fashion. We're continuing on this road that we're on, where we're looking into people who have changed or influenced the sneaker game. And last week, we talked about 5 people who have fundamentally changed the game. And those 5 people were Adi Dassler, Phil Knight, Dolores Jordan, Virgil Abloh, and sneaker resellers. So we're going to continue today by looking at 12 more people. These are not the only 12 people that have influenced sneaker culture, but they are 12 people who I feel have left their own unique mark on sneaker culture, and I thought that they were important for you to know about. And so hopefully you will learn something. Hopefully you have learned something through all this, so let's get into it. And I think if you're going to look at people, you have to start with designers, and there have been a ton of sneaker designers throughout the course of history. But I think if you're going to start there, you have to start with the man, the myth, the legend, and that is Tinker Hatfield. He's legendary, and he's legendary at Nike for a reason. And the famous story is that he transitioned from architecture to shoe design vis-a-vis the Air Max 1, which was his introduction, in my opinion, to sneaker culture. They took a flyer on him, and he also introduced the first ever visible air unit. I think that's important because that's something you see very, very heavily even today in sneakers. He designed numerous Air Jordans, but I think he's most famous for the Air Jordan 3, probably even the Air Jordan 11. But as we talk about a lot, the Air Jordan 3 kept Michael at the company, so that one's important. All of those things saved Jordan brand, saved the Air Jordan line, and I think if not for that fact, Michael Jordan wouldn't have been at the company. All of his designs had functionality, they had aesthetic appeal, and I think that he influenced designs and trends for the future. And while maybe not all of his works are great, he definitely had his own influence. And I think if you're going to stick to this time period, somebody who predates him, Peter Moore, and he was considered the quote-unquote mastermind behind the Air Jordan 1, and possibly even the Jumpman logo. And I know that maybe there's a little bit of a debate as to whether that's true, but the Jumpman logo, which was seen for the first time on the Air Jordan 3, is really what kept Michael there. So I think Peter Moore and Tinker Hatfield probably had their own hands in the pot there. But I believe that Peter Moore had an influence because he really helped to revolutionize basketball sneakers. The Air Jordan 1 really laid the foundation for the sneaker culture boom of the 80s and 90s, and even all the way until today. The strategic branding that they did elevated the Air Jordan to a cultural phenomenon. It's not debatable that this is a cultural phenomenon today, and that legacy continues and will always continue. And if you're continuing to stay in the designer realm and you're continuing to stay at Nike, I don't think that you could do a series like this without talking about Sandy Boddicker. Now, I want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Lee, who really enjoyed the Nike SB episode that we did about a month ago. And I mentioned his name, Sandy Boddicker, in that episode. He really is considered a visionary, and he played a crucial role in the development of Nike SB, which was Nike skateboarding. Taking skateboarding culture and bringing it to sneakers was huge, and it really helped Nike break into a new market, and that was the skateboarding market. And while the Nike Dunk wasn't created by Sandy Boddicker, I believe he's credited with at least being a part of the design of the first Nike SB Dunk. And those dunks are known for different padding and having their fat tongue. And I think that it really bridged the gap between athletic performance and skate culture, because I believe at that point in time, and even until very recently, I think skateboarding culture was seen as sort of an outsider's activity. And I think Nike SB being what it is today has made that a little bit more mainstream and brought a community into Nike that I don't think that they would have even tapped into at all. And I think now when you look at skateboarding footwear and even marketing to those niches, I think that that's because of Sandy Boddicker. And so without Sandy Boddicker, there is no Nike SB. And without Nike SB, there is none of the Nike SB Dunks that we have and a whole bunch of other collaborations. Staying in the designer world, I think you're talking about international influence. You're going to talk about Hiroshi Fujiwara. And he was a Japanese designer and also a music producer. And he is really known, or at least referred to, as the godfather of streetwear. He's collaborated with Nike on a whole different bunch of things. I think he's most famous for his Fragment designs, and the Fragment Jordan 1 is one of the weirdly most coveted Jordan 1s out there. I don't understand the appeal, but I do understand the influence, and I think you would be remiss if you didn't have his name here. Taking high fashion, blending it with streetwear. Streetwear, in my opinion, is kind of one of those things that kind of toes the line, and I believe that it toes the line because of this man's influence, and there's no doubt that he has to be mentioned here. And if you're going to mention Fujiwara, you have to mention Nigo, who was the founder of A Bathing Ape. We talked about the Bapesta the last time, or one of the last times, and it's a reinterpretation of the Nike Air Force 1. And it took some of that street culture and kind of gave it a luxury feel. And it really helped to shape sneaker trends with patent leather on an Air Force 1, something that Nike not only did with the Air Force 1, but also went into the Air Jordan 11 with that. And we talked about that last time. Nigo still has a presence today, and while he is no longer with Nike, he does have an influence with Adidas, and he does have a name, and Bape has a name. And I think that that's what's really important, is that that brand has stood the test of time, and some of the most unique collaborations and unique shoes of the past, or at least 20 years ago, they're because of Nigo, and I think his name is 100% important in sneaker culture. And then there's the last of the designers that we are going to look at today. And I think if you are going to look at designers, you have to look at sneaker culture today. And what is something that stands out about sneakers today? Well, I think it is the inclusion of Asics, New Balance, and other sort of shoes like that were mostly known as athletic and running shoes. And I think when you look at people who kind of influenced that movement, younger people today might say Joe Freshgoods, and I think that that is recency bias. But let's look at Ronnie Fieg, and he is the founder of Kith. And Kith is one of the most well-known boutiques of all time, in my opinion. And he did a ton of collaborations, not just with Asics, but New Balance specifically, that are just absolutely fire. Fire to this day, that are from 10 years ago, even a little bit longer ago. Yes, of course, he has done some work with Nike, and of course, he has the boutique. And the boutique has become sort of this premier destination for sneaker people. And I think today, sneaker people have sort of merged into this place where they like luxury. They like to feel as if their sneaker buying experience is just that. It is a premium experience. And because of men like Ronnie, I think that pushed the boundaries of what collaborations could do and what retail experiences could do. And I do feel like that changed the game in a lot of ways, because there are so many boutiques very similar to that now. And if you go to like Ama Maniere, for instance, it's a luxury experience. And that's because of the influence that Ronnie had. I think now we're going to move into the realm of media people and also influencers, because designers aren't just the only people who have had an influence. I think that celebrities, of course, have influence, and that's what you call influencers now, and media people. And I think if you're going to start with these people, you have to go all the way back to Spike Lee. And Spike Lee is not as known today in the sneaker game as I think he once was, but he is an acclaimed filmmaker. He's an acclaimed actor, of course. And I believe that he really influenced sneaker culture through his work with Nike, but also, more importantly, through the character of Mars Blackman. And he was in an Air Jordan commercial that kind of brought new hype to sneakers. And so much of that, I think, created this sort of culture of sneakers being really awesome in the streets, if you will. And I think that it was really, they were a sign of urban fashion. It elevated their status to the point that they became part of the entertainment industry. And while it wasn't mainstream in the entertainment industry back then, it is now. And I think there is no denying that. And because of Spike Lee, I think that is something that has become more normal than what used to be. And if we're going to move on, talking about media people, Kevin Ma, who was the founder of Hypebeast. The media has had a large part in sneaker culture's growth. Today, the media exists on social media. But for the longest time, before we ever had social media, before we ever had all of these easy access ways to get sneaker pictures, sneaker news, you had publications, you had magazines. And Hypebeast was one of the most famous of those. It really shaped sneaker culture by influencing it through media. It started as a blog and then became what it is today, which was a media powerhouse. It influenced trends. It was able to showcase trends, showcase sneaker releases. It really built hype. And it connected with the sneaker community in a way that I think a lot of other people weren't able to do on a more global scale, or at least on a mass scale. Yes, people were connecting with each other one-on-one, but I think Hypebeast was able to build this following through its blog into this place where people felt like it was a central place to go, and it was a central place for people to talk about. And it was just a platform that people went to. And I think that that's heavily influential, because now today there's Complex, there's Sneaker News, there's a ton of them. And I think it's because of the influence that Hypebeast had, and by extension, Kevin Ma, of course. And then, of course, there's Simon Wood. Now, Simon Wood is the founder of Sneaker Freaker, and Sneaker Freaker is a book, or created a book that I have, which was, I think, like the best sneaker book of all time or something like that. And it really was almost like a documentation of all of sneaker culture, and it was through a magazine, and that's pretty cool. It became a go-to source for news, just like Hypebeast, but I think in a different way. And I think that the history of sneakers has sort of been captured in this way that it's almost like the Dead Sea Scrolls of sneakers. And it's pretty cool to look back through all of their magazine ads, look back through all of their highlights, everything. And you see just how things have changed, not just sneakers, but also media as well. And I think that that influence has been pretty cool, because it allows for the history, which is really rich in sneakers, to be preserved, to be promoted. And again, in-depth storytelling. I think that storytelling in sneakers is very important, and while maybe the stories aren't as important today because people are just worried about whether the colorway is fire, the stories of all time that have been happening over the last 40 plus years, they've been documented in this publication, and I think that that's very, very important. Of course, you wouldn't have these magazines without marketing and without branding, and I think we would be, again, remiss to not talk about somebody who had an influence there. And let's talk about a man named John Jay. And maybe that's not a name that many people are familiar with, but he was a creative director and a marketer at Nike. And he really helped to shape their brand image through his advertising campaigns. And his advertising campaigns were really innovative. A lot of people in my age range probably know the campaign Bo Knows. And that's because of this man right here. And a lot of people give him credit for the Just Do It slogan, that's Nike's iconic phrase. It's always going to be associated with Nike. That approach really helped to elevate Nike. Their marketing, their branding became top tier. And once Jordan was on board, man, it was just, they attached a rocket to themselves and off they went. And I think the reason why it was innovative is because it helped to connect with a broader audience. It took some creativity and some strategic thinking, and it put it into a medium, sports, that probably hadn't been marketed that way before. I think it inspired a lot of strategies that have come since then, and I think that sneaker marketing and sneaker branding was fundamentally changed because of that. And of course, you're not going to build hype without advertising, and so I think John Jay is an important part of that piece. And then of course there's visionaries. And I think when you look at visionaries, there's one name that comes to mind that is not Virgil Abloh, and that is Kanye West. Kanye West is controversial in many different ways today in 2024. And I was actually just having a conversation with somebody who was asking me about him and about his influence. His name is undoubtedly synonymous with modern sneaker culture. He really helped to revolutionize the industry with the Yeezy line, and I think more specifically the Yeezy 350. And we talked about that with models that changed the game. It was an instant hit. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before. And that collaboration with Adidas, which took some elements of high fashion and kind of put it into streetwear, but it also became accessibility. But it was a weird kind of accessibility because it wasn't accessible to everybody, but the plan was to just sort of inundate the market with shoes so that everybody had an opportunity to have a Yeezy. And I think the combination of that brand strategy and also just the innovative way in which these shoes looked and felt, it was a home run. And Kanye has done a lot of things recently that has been questionable, but there is no doubt that he has done so much for sneakers with the Yeezy 2, with the Yeezy line, with both companies, Nike and Adidas. And he is a visionary, and he'll always be that. And I say that a lot about Kanye, is that no matter how you feel about him personally, he will always be on the Mount Rushmore of sneakers because he just had that kind of an influence. And while I didn't put him as people who fundamentally changed the game because he came in at a time in which the game had really already been fundamentally changed, one of his shoes definitely did. And so it's hard to talk about influence without talking about him. And last, if you want to talk about controversy and you want to talk about influence, especially in modern sneaker culture today, I think that you have to talk about the rise of replica sneakers, and maybe more specifically, replica sneaker factories in China. It's no secret that I have dabbled in that world. I know quite a bit about that world, less than I used to, but I'm at least familiar with that world and understand the influence that it has had. And I want everybody who thinks that fakes are bad, and I'm not here to discuss the morality, but think about it this way. Imagine if you are somebody who is in the game and can't get the things that you want, and then the pandemic happens, the world is shut down, you are looking for some kind of an outlet, but you don't have the money to go to GOAT or StockX to buy these shoes. And all of a sudden you discover this entire market that exists and that thrives on accessibility. Accessibility of some of the most coveted shoes of all time, some of the most coveted shoes of the modern era, and you can get just about whatever you want. And I think that that market emerged because although it's always existed, it was there at a time when people needed it the most. And the thing about it, though, is that it's controversial because it has had a controversial impact on the game, where you have a lot of people who basically question every single shoe that they see that is above a certain hype level because they assume that it is fake. And I'm here to tell you that it's probably true that a good amount of them are. And there's questions about whether these replicas have ruined sneakers and so many things that people debate about. But you now have these sort of parallel markets that are challenging the notions of authenticity and intellectual property. And while it is illegal to reproduce these and sell these, the idea of wearing it is a different story. And it comes down to how you define authenticity. And so recently, we have seen the demand of these shoes rise and the demand of sneakers in general rise, but I think also what comes with that is the rise of replicas and that accessibility that exists. And I think that from here on out, we're always going to have that debate. Some people are pro, some people are con, some people are in the middle. That's not really what it's about for me. But you cannot deny that in some form, replica sneakers have had an influence, because I think that what it has done is opened up the game to so many people who may never have been a part of it because they didn't have the accessibility. And that comes down to how you define sneakers, how you define the culture, but replicas are part of the game now, whether you like it or not. And before we get to the end of this episode, let's get to the release of the week. Release of the week, where I like to highlight a shoe that catches my eye. It's not always hype. Sometimes it is. It's just a shoe that I want you to know about. And wouldn't you know it, we're actually going to talk about an Adidas. And it is the Adidas GT2, the Sneakers and Stuff collaboration. $130 US is low for a shoe these days. It releases on May 30th. It has green suede, it has a gum sole, and it has design nods to the rave scene in Stockholm. And full disclosure, I have never been to Stockholm, nor have I ever been to a rave, but perhaps there are people out there who can identify with that. But if you can't, it's still a fire shoe, especially for an everyday wear. I think that they put a lot of premium materials on it, and I think they took a little bit of care, especially for $130. So if you need something that looks like it, just your general sort of Adidas shoe that kind of looks fire, can go with anything, this is your chance for $130 US on May 30th. All right, everybody, that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this deep dive into these people. And while, again, it is not comprehensive, it is at least people who have influenced the game. And what I really hope for you is that it sparks you to go out and research on your own. Because I don't have a research team here. I can only do so much. And I think it's important that we all understand the history of sneakers and understand the history of where we have been in this industry and in this culture. And I hope that it inspires you to go out there and look up some of this history, because I think it's important and I think it's actually really, really cool. If you want to get more content, of course, you can subscribe on any podcast app that you have. There is a YouTube channel for this, Fire Footwear, a sneaker podcast. If you want to watch some videos, I am putting together a video series for a lot of these topics that we're talking about. They are vastly different. I'm trying to take a little bit of artistic creativity and take a few risks. So I hope that you go there, subscribe, check out some of the videos. It means a lot. Feel free to leave a review on whatever app it is that is appropriate. I want to thank everybody for taking out the time to listen as always. I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe. And I'll talk to everybody next time. This is Fire Footwear. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Fire Footwear are those of Matt Frates and his guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Fire Footwear is exclusively owned by Matt Frates and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.